Okay, so nice, easy one to start with. Have you always wanted to work in the IT industry?
Not specifically, to be honest. I always wanted to make a real difference, and it was something that I could do by doing software development. Effectively, you're creating new experiences, you're trying to make things work better for the user, and that's really what I was excited about, and why I ended up in IT.
Okay, so the journey to get where you are today, I don't know sort of how many twists and turns along the way, but if you can give us a sort of potted history of where you started from and how you've arrived at Fujitsu.
Yeah, of course. So when I started as a software developer, I'm Dutch actually, so I started in Holland, working for ABN AMRO, and after a couple of years there, I became part of the team that developed their first internet bank, which is quite a strange thing to realize now. We do everything on our phones, but at the time that was quite groundbreaking, and that was really exciting. And then I moved to the UK, moved to London, through working again for different banks, ended up with the regulators. Then started working in the defense and public sector space. So I've kind of moved through lots of different business domains, but always looking at architecture, looking at how to create those better experiences. That's always been sort of the thread all the way through. I worked in logistics, and then about 3.5 years ago came to work for Fujitsu. Defense is a fantastic space to work in, and incredibly rewarding, but also as an environment it's slower, and so going back to financial services was something that really appealed to me, because it is really fast paced, and it's really on the sharp edge of innovation. There's lots of new, the adaptation in financial services of new innovations is much faster than in most other industries, and that's been really exciting from my perspective. I think it's a really, really interesting industry at the moment, and working in Fujitsu, we can bring some of the technologies that are disrupting that industry at the moment, and I guess as part of that, becoming a leader as well, which is also a really interesting journey for me personally.
Okay, so in terms of the your career today, the challenges you've encountered, and also, I mean, you work for a period in Holland, so it'd be interesting for you to sort of compare and contrast, if it's possible, both sort of Holland and the UK, challenges you might have faced, and also the different industries you've sort of been in. Yeah, any thoughts onto that? And if I can add just one more, just to further confuse the picture, whether you think those challenges were just normal career challenges, or whether you think your gender was, an issue in one or more of those.
Sure. So to take the cultural difference first, there is definitely a difference. And when I was working over 20 years ago in the Netherlands, it was perfectly normal for men to have reduced hours so they could spend some time looking after their children. And it has a different working culture. It was much less about being seen to be at your desk. It was much more outcomes based. As long as you did your job, nobody really cared how much time it took you to do that. And so that's the case with several Nordic countries. Norway, for example, is quite renowned for that. So it was a bit of a shock to the system to come to the UK, but at the time I didn't have kids, I was working in London, and I quite enjoyed the lifestyle that came with it. But even with those differences, I was very much a young female traipsing around a bank with a predominantly male workforce, both in the IT side and in the financial services industry. And again, defense is no different in that respect either. When I was younger, I was quite happy with that. It didn't really bother me. If I look back now, was I treated differently? Yes, probably, both for being young and female. But it didn't get in my way. It didn't bother me so much. And I could hold my own, if you like. So that was not so much of an issue. As I got further in my career, it became different. I guess I was always adopted as one of the chapettes, as one of the boys, and so that was fine. But actually, when you look back at that, that's not okay, because in many ways that's saying that boys are better, and I was recognized as being equal to the boys, as opposed to being lesser as a female. But it didn't really stop me in my career as such. when I had kids, I became a lot more aware of it. When you're pregnant, you have to think, well, I'm going to step out. It's really quite a daunting prospect to step out for 6 months or whatever time you decide to take your maternity leave your career behind and hope to pick it back up whilst you then have kids to look after as well. So that was quite daunting. Again, to be honest, I went back full time. I went back part time after my first child. But I had some key female stakeholders, key sponsors in the business. So actually it didn't impact my career all that much. It was very much more in my head because it did affect my perception, but actually looking back, my career was fine. It was when some of those female sponsors disappeared that I really hit the glass ceiling. When I came back, when I'd had my kids, came back, full of energy for my career, and simply got nowhere, got absolutely nowhere. That was much more intimidating, to be honest, and that's something I had to work my way out of simply by getting out of that environment and getting to a more supportive environment. And I had some key sponsors and mentors who supported me with that. And within Fujitsu, having had that leap of making that change, when I came into Fujitsu, I came in to do compressed hours because that's what I was doing at my previous job, because it worked with the balance with my lifestyle. That was something very new for Fujitsu. So the team were very supportive, curious how that might work, what some of the barriers and constraints might be, but absolutely supportive. And I've had feedback since that as well from some of my managers in that particular time when I joined, that after I joined, other women didn't see the same barriers because I broke them. And I find that really empowering. That's why I'm quite a outspoken role model now, because I can see the impact it has when you support other women and when you break those barriers loudly so that they don't exist anymore, that people can see that actually it can be done. It's not a challenge. It's just a different way of thinking.
And just I'm following up on the compressed hours. Did you find, you say you had some sponsors and a lot of support from Fujitsu, but did you also have colleagues that were a bit skeptical or just thought, it was a bit unfair that you were getting special treatment, or did everyone sort of understand and buy in on the basis that they respected that you were doing, the job that you were supposed to, and therefore it was fine, as and when you work?
So the people I work with directly absolutely saw the impact I was having and had no issue. No one challenged me to my face, but I know that there were people who were going, well, she's doing things differently. There's always that resistance to change, but all the stakeholders that I worked with, all the teams that I worked with had absolutely no challenge at all about it, and were very supportive. And in fact, in some cases, I saw men in our team going, I can't do that time because I've got to go and pick up the kids. And so it almost gave everyone permission to say, well, some time is my time and it's protected.
Okay, and in terms of the changes you might have seen over that time, clearly, as you say, Fujitsu sound like they're very enlightened in terms of looking after you. But do you think that is, you're lucky because that that is them as a company, or do you think, or would you like to think if you work for many other organizations, they would have had a similarly open attitude to different work practices? So I guess what I'm saying is, have you seen things change for the better? And if you have, do you think that's just because you got lucky with your employer, or generally people are being much more aware of diversity and flexibility alongside it?
The people are more aware of flexibility, and as a company, Fujitsu is very proactive and conscious of what they can do and what they can put in place to support more women in the workplace at different levels, and really quite data driven as well. Where are some of the barriers? What can we do for that particular group? What is stopping that particular group breaking that barrier? So Fujitsu is very conscious, but equally as a culture, it's more progressive in some areas than others. And I think it's the culture that's changed over time. I now regularly find myself in meetings where there are at least multiple women, if not in cases all women on the call. And that's certainly something that never used to happen at the start of my career, for example. But then equally, I think because I am at a certain level and I can evidence the value that I bring in the role that I do, that I'm able to demand the flexibility, because they'll accept that. And I think that's why I got the compressed hours, not because that was a policy that was in place at the time. They simply went, I can see the value you bring to the company. This is part of what you need for that to be successful. Let's put it in place.
Yeah, and I see during the pandemic, I'm pretty sure Fujitsu sent out a release that the whole company culture, they were embracing sort of hybrid working a long time before others. I seem to remember they were pretty much said, we're closing a load of offices, or shrinking office space and empowering people to work much more flexibly in terms of how and where. So as you say, the company you work for, you're lucky that they are very much sort of on the leading edge as opposed to following on from others. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for a Japanese company especially, that was really significant, because whilst in the Western world that's a lot more accepted, actually in Japan there was much more that working culture of being seen, much more so than here. Even I talked about that step change going from the Netherlands to the UK, but Japan is far more extreme in that. So for a Japanese-based company to commit so early on to hybrid working, and that has stayed. So while some of the larger banks, for example, have gone back to wanting people back in the office, Fujitsu have stuck with hybrid working, having a hub-based policy where we have locations, some of our office locations. So we have reduced our footprint in terms of offices, but not massively in terms of some of the key locations around the country, to make sure that people still have somewhere to collaborate, because it's really important that for a well-being and from a team perspective, that you do have somewhere where people can come together. Some people don't have a fantastic setup at home and really want to come into the office because they need that space and they need that connection with people, because they might be on their own or might be in a home environment that's less easy to work with. So yeah, absolutely. And that hasn't changed at all from that very early on commitment to say we are going completely hybrid working. You work where you work, when you work, in the way that works for you, provided that works with the customer requirements and our obligations to the customer. So yeah, that's it's really positive to be in a company that makes such a impactful change.
And in terms of sort of progress that could be made more generally, do you think, as I say, Fujitsu sounds like it's at sort of ahead of, shall we say, where the average, if there is such a thing, is. But do you think there is still progress to be made, whether it's within Fujitsu or just more generally in terms of helping? I imagine the pandemic and this hybrid working has helped open companies' minds a bit more to how and where and who works, etc. But just think there's still much more that needs to be done to improve sort of diversity in particular within organizations?
Yes, there is still massive progress to be made. There is still a gender pay gap to be closed, and we are very open about our gender pay gap and our ethnicity pay gap as well, in terms of the things that we do to try and support that. I think the harder thing, so the policies are quite easy, but if you look at the pandemic, that's been a double-edged sword for women. On the one hand, the flexibility makes it a lot easier to work to fit work around home demand, but equally women were much more impacted by the pandemic and some of the caring responsibilities, for example, with home learning and things like that. So quite a lot of the female workforce dropped out at that time. Not so much in Fujitsu, to be honest, but more broadly. So yes, there are changes to be made. I think the changes that need to be made now are more subtle because they're more about culture. So the policies are pretty much in place. So now it's really more about making that the norm. So we have got quite a well-balanced female leadership team, for example. Our CEO in the UK is a female, Anwen Owen, she's brilliant. And we've got a number of other role models across our business. But it's really that increasing that flow through all the way from junior people, people coming back into the workforce after taking time out for maternity leave or for other reasons, and that culture change in enabling men to be more providing them more flexibility and making it acceptable that they can take caring responsibilities as well, and they balance their priorities as well. So those are some of the things that we still need to work on, and those are things that we're exploring. So I'm co-chair of our Women's Business Network, and we work with our HR organization to look at what training can we provide for managers, what can we do to help everyone be more aware of unconscious bias, because generally it's not ill-intended at all, but our society is framed around women look after everyone and men go and earn money, still in many ways, and it's shifting that. And we also do a lot of outreach with schools and universities to encourage more girls into STEM, for example, because we simply need to show where the value add is, because there's such disruptive innovation going through all businesses, and as I said, financial services very much so, and it's really important that women play their part in that, and that we have a diverse set of people who are creating those new environments, those new ways of doing things, because women are half the workforce, or half the population. They make decisions. They want to work in a way, they want to interact with companies in a way that works for them equally, and that's still not always the case.
And I'm interested in terms of, because you've worked in various industries, I don't know if you keep in touch with people in those. So do you have any sort of handle on whether the IT industry is, I mean, it's portrayed as being very much male dominated compared to other sectors. Is that fair, or how do you think it is doing in terms of addressing any imbalance compared to other? Do you have any sort of knowledge of that, or not now?
So there's a huge influx of female role models and celebrating women in the industry. So we're seeing a lot more key female leaders in, for example, AWS, Google, companies like that. So there's definitely progress, because the 30% is the tipping point. If you get to a 30% representation of any minority group, you start seeing a change in the culture, because it becomes a big enough influence to impact the whole. And some companies are getting close to 30%, others aren't. So I think we're sort of getting close to that tipping point. It's still a struggle to get girls and women into STEM, and I think part of the challenge is because technology is growing so rapidly as an industry, because really every industry is a technology industry now, because it's growing so rapidly. Whilst we're seeing an increase in the number of women in the industry, overall the representation doesn't change, because there are that many more men getting involved as well. And I think that's one of the key challenges: how do we balance it out?
Okay, and in terms of people looking at getting in the IT industry, have you, I mean, it sounds like you've had a lovely career, and you've more or less enjoyed all of it. So are there any sort of downsides or anything you'd warn people about if they were looking at the IT industry, or for the reasons you've explained? And as you say, I mean, every business is an IT industry, so it's pretty much fundamental that, to the future of the the business world. Therefore, it's very important. So would you just unreservedly recommend it for people, or are there any things they need to just be aware of when they start out?
So no, I don't think there's anything to be aware of. I think there's a huge value in women coming into the industry. In many ways, all organizations are looking how they can become more purpose-driven, because that's what the society is demanding from our companies now. It's that they have ethical behavior, that they deliver social value back to society, and aren't just there for driving profit for the shareholders, if you like. And I think women generally are more in tune to delivering that. So if you look at startup companies, for example, often female founders, startup companies that have a social value to bring, whether that's whether that's working in deprived areas or parts of the world, or looking at sustainability or looking at diversity and inclusion, you often see women doing more in that space than men do, because they get more satisfaction from that, and so they're driven to that. So I think that's one of the things that companies can see as value from women. I think the other, and that's not I'm not trying to generalize there, but if you look at the broad industry, that certainly is the case. I think the other thing is that we talk about STEM, but actually there should be an A. Some people say STEAM, some people put the A on the end and say STEM A. If you look at, for example, the metaverse and how that's impacting the entertainment industry, how people are experiencing environments, there's a huge artistic side to things, a huge creative side to technology in terms of what you can create and how that can benefit people. And I think that's one of the other areas where women are generally better at creative things. And so not to be intimidated by the technology behind it, or the geeky technology side of things, because ultimately what's underpinning the metaverse in many ways is virtual reality, it's blockchain, it's things that are considered to be geeky, but actually the impact is massively artistically. And so it's really bringing some of that value in that unique perspective that companies and society can benefit from.
Okay, and maybe just as we finish, if there was one or two things that you think are obviously needed to be, what you could change if you were, in charge, whether it's a Fujitsu or, the IT industry in generally, or, things that need to be just stopped, practices stopped. Any thoughts as to, what you think might make, a big impact if it was changed? Any thoughts on that?
So I think a lot of the big impact, a lot of the big changes have been made. Really now it's about the culture that's about understanding and appreciating the value that individuals can bring and how they can bring that. And that's really where the big power is going to come from, because we're doing a lot of work with our Women in Business Network now with bringing men into the conversation, which is part of that making flexibility available for everyone and giving everyone the space. And actually a lot of men are also saying, well, I don't want to behave like the traditional male figure. That's not how I identify, but at work I have to behave like that because it's what's expected. And I think it's a lot around that, those expectations, and giving everyone the flexibility to be who they are, so that they can bring the best of who they are and they can have a fulfilling career just like I've had.
Okay, that's lovely. It's been great to chat to you, and thanks for sharing your thoughts and insights. So, Krista, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.